no one seems to want to have the discussion of what does that actually mean for society after that. Everyone just seems very bold on stating that human jobs won't be necessary anymore. When it comes to data, it's really important to have the subject matter understanding of the client workflows and knowledge and be able to transform our product so that it can be as best used as possible.
If we were to partner today and build a brand new expert network, what core principles would you preserve from the traditional model and what would you throw out entirely? Hello and welcome to the Heuristic Code podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we are unpacking the future of expert networks, where strategy, compliance, and insight delivery coverage in the rapidly evolving system. Joining me is Dan Entrup, a seasoned leader who has worked across consulting, growth strategy, and operations at some of the most innovative players in the expert network space, including GLG and Alpha Sites. Dan brings a rare inside-out perspective on what it really takes to match high-stakes questions with the right experts at speed, at scale, and under regulatory pressure, of course. So in this episode, we dig into the invisible infrastructure behind expert calls, the shift towards AI-enabled insight pipelines, how emerging technologies like NLP and multilingual automation are reshaping what clients expect from expert networks. Whether you are a founder, operator, or investor, this conversation will challenge how you think about the future of knowledge as a service. So Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. Pleasure to be here. Really appreciate you having me on and looking forward to discussing today.
Dan, let's start with your background. So you spent pretty much your career at the crossroad of consulting, operations, and strategy. What initially drew you into the expert network space and what made you stay there?
Yeah, so I started in the space. This is going back to January of 2013. I moved to New York City over a weekend and started at Alpha Sites on that Monday. I remember going through the interview process, and I candidly had not heard of expert networks before. I hadn't come across the company while I was in school, kind of came across it pretty shortly after online and really just thought the concept was interesting. I love sort of the form of qualitative research and connecting people. So this was even before I even really understood, what the value was to the clients. I just liked the workflow. I liked I've always been a problem solver and love working on different types of puzzles and actual puzzles all the time. And so kind of getting that brief from a client and being able to go out and try to figure out who would be knowledgeable on a certain topic, vet those individuals, and really build a lot of different relationships across different industries is something that holds true, something I really value today. But back then was something that really attracted me to the space, and incredibly grateful that I was able to join at that time and see a lot of the company's early and now continued growth. And it really kickstarted off my career in the overall primary research space, both expert-based research as well as then getting into the data space, which I'm sure we'll talk about as well.
So then a couple words about your current venture.
Yeah, so I started Acknowledge with an old colleague who actually spent about 13 years at GLG and an engineering leader from companies like HubSpot and TeamShares. And what we are is a data management and enrichment service that's purpose-built for knowledge networks. So we work with expert networks, survey panels, headhunters and recruiters, really anyone who's sitting on a database of people and reaching out to them based on their experience and expertise. And what we provide them is really robust data on people, not just where they work and what their title is, but everything that we know about that company, everything that we know about the vendors, products, and services and tools that company is using. And in order to do that, we aggregate about 15 different data sets across people, companies, vendors, and then some industry-specific applications like in the healthcare space. There's a ton of data out there that can be used to better target individuals and better sort of qualify their expertise and experience. And it's been an incredible journey so far. We've been at it just over a year now. We're very fortunate to be working with some of the largest, most sophisticated expert networks, as well as some newer, smaller upstarts who are taking more of a tech-forward or AI-driven approach to their work. But Overall, I'm a big believer of the power of expert-based insights. I mentioned when I started back in 2013, I hadn't even yet known the value to the clients yet. Throughout my career, I have been a user of sometimes formally expert networks and other times just reaching out to people and effectively conducting an expert call. And that could be whether diligencing something for M&A purposes at a company, or just we're thinking about evaluating a new tool, like a new marketing automation platform, for example, going and reaching out and speaking with people who have done it before, who know the pain points in particular. And I always like to speak with people before kind of making any large decision, and really just getting their perspective. If they've done it before, what do they wish they knew? What do they wish they asked? What was their expectation, and how did something actually play out? And then, of course, what are their thoughts on different vendors or tools that would be in the category that we're looking at? So throughout my career, I've been a user of expert-based insights and research, in addition to now helping enable the expert networks and the various connectors of those sources of information and insight.
I've been in the industry way less than you've been. And still, for me, it's been sort of an eye opener in the sense that how easily we can leverage the expertise of other people. And once you start, looking at how it's been leveraged for high-stake business decisions, you sort of adapt it in your personal life as well. So I don't want to think about certain things like, oh, so before I actually invest or buy or, go somewhere, I'll probably go and talk to other people. They may not be, expert, but still, I think it's just kind of the mindset. And for me, it's big shift in this mindset since I started working with expert networks.
You bring up an interesting point about them not necessarily being experts. I think there's expertise and then there's experience, are the two words that I'll mention a lot. And sometimes I want to speak with someone who's not, where they would self-describe themselves or others would describe themselves as an expert on something. I mean, if you think about it, like travel reviews, for example, or restaurant reviews, I bet more often than not, you go to a restaurant because a friend went to that restaurant and enjoyed it, versus reading the food critics in, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, kind of major publications. And not to critique those models, I think they serve a very valuable position in exchanging information. But more often than not, we end up speaking with people who it's something based on their experience, not necessarily where they would define themselves as a true expert. And I think one of the things that you end up seeing when you look at a lot of these sort of diligence calls that clients are doing, especially when they're doing them at scale, like a management consulting firm will do 80 to 100 calls on a certain project. They're not only speaking with the former CEOs and the CFOs. They want to speak with the people who have the experience, where they've done something in the space. Maybe they've been a customer, and they definitely wouldn't necessarily talk about themselves as being an expert in something. And that was one of the things that used to come up a lot, particularly on those sort of customer angle type of projects that I remember back when I used to be calling experts and vetting them for project. They would answer the phone and I would tell them a little bit about the project, and they would say, well, I'm not really an expert on this. I work in this industry. We just happen to be a customer of something. And it's really that experience that you're actually looking for, and not necessarily what society may describe or deem as expertise. That's a really important thing that even further broadens. Like if I were to go buy a car tomorrow, I would probably try it. Let's say I was evaluating 3 different cars from 3 different marques. I would probably speak with someone who has bought one of each of the 3 of them, and I highly doubt those people are automotive experts. I can get the automotive expertise by reading Car and Driver and automotive magazines. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I want to speak with the person who made this purchase already, predated me on that purchase, has gone through that experience, and can now give me that feedback directly, and where I can ask follow-up questions to understand if there was any bias, which is another challenging thing with sort of the online reviews type of model, is you don't always know what the bias is, and you don't have an opportunity to ask follow-up questions. So I think that's really the power of getting on the phone with someone, whether it's for 30 minutes, 60 minutes longer. You get that back and forth dialogue and get to adapt your questions as the conversation is going on.
Then the fundamental value of expert networks is finding those people who have the expertise, not necessarily stating that they are expert in this, And that's kind of the magic that expert networks do and been doing for the decades now. I see it like a matchmaking. But then the question is, the quality of output heavily depends on the quality of data that you're making your decisions on, whether this person is actually relevant and, have expertise that you're looking for. I assume that's what you addressing and acknowledge.
Yeah, so what we're doing is we're helping the expert networks to first figure out who should they reach out to. So one of those things that's kind of like invisible, I think, to a lot of the client side is the work that the expert network is doing from when they initially get in that project request to when they send over that list of individuals. So maybe they send over a list of 10 individuals. They may have reached out to 200 people, gotten responses from 100 people, spoken on the phone with 50 people and determined that 10 were correct. And so a lot of that ratio is what's unseen in terms of how much outreach there is for every, not only successful consult, but just even person that gets sent over who's vetted for that request. And then there's the vetting process in there. So what we're doing is we're helping them identify, if we said there were 200 people, maybe only 75 of them needed to be reached out to. And maybe the 75 that you're going to reach out to are actually a different 75 than you would have without having information. So knowing things about like the company that someone works at, like it may sound very simple, but I get a lot of requests for surveys where I screen out based on company size. And I'll find out later that the requirement from the client was that I worked at a company with more than 1,000 people. I hope we get there someday. Or maybe I don't. There's a lot of efficiencies that we have that I don't know that we'll ever be a type of company that has 1,000 people. We can talk about that separately. But ultimately, I never should have received that request. And it was a waste of my time. It was a waste of the survey company's time. And at the end of the day, it slows down the delivery of the right people to the client and makes me less likely the next time to even respond to those requests. So there's been an incredible amount of fatigue of kind of answering a lot of these questions and then not qualifying for certain projects. And so what we're doing is we're helping the networks to determine who should I be reaching out to? And essentially what's the minimum amount of people I need to reach out to? But when you reach out to those people, there's a much higher likelihood that they're going to qualify for that project request. And we sort of answer a lot of those pre-screening questions for them, whether that's number of employees that they have at the company, the revenue or the revenue estimate of the company, who a company competes with, down to the products that company is using. So if someone's doing some voice of customer research and needs to engage, say, Marketo customers of marketing automation technology who work in the insurance industry at companies with more than 1,000 people, all of those attributes are data items and data that we license and clean up and stitch together and deliver to them in one consolidated pipeline where it's all connected so that they can start with actually a short list of people who pre-screen into that project request. And then they connect with them and they sort of jump right into, are there any more advanced vetting questions or anything else that they need to ask that couldn't be answered with data? But a lot of the initial screener questions can be answered with data, or at least preempted with data. You may still want to confirm certain things. And so the value of the expert networks, I think remains the administrative work and then sort of that search capability of knowing how to reach out to people really quickly and understanding what those ratios look like, but then actually vetting those experts and coming up with a short list of who their client should speak with. A lot more, I think, goes into that than most outside of the space end up seeing. And you really see it when you work in these networks sort of behind the scenes.
What other problematic or bottlenecks in the process you've seen while you worked at large expert networks? And the problem that you just described is pretty much solved by technology in the recent years. We have more computation power, we can scrape more data, we can aggregate it. So it wasn't that much accessible in the past. So what parts of the process that you've experienced yourself and seen in expert networks still under leveraged as far as technology goes?
Yeah, I think this isn't commenting on the industry as a whole, as there are definitely some innovative players who have made some and large players who have made some very significant strides with technology. But actually, if I liken it to another market that we work with, which is the recruiting and executive search market, that's another industry that I think is, I don't like to use the term disruption that much. I don't think it's disrupting. It's ripe for opportunity, an opportunity for technology to come in and play a very significant role of helping to improve those processes. But when I look at the industry as a whole of recruiting as well, in most recruiting firms are stuck on pretty legacy tech stacks, legacy databases, and a lot of those databases are not programmatically or dynamically updated. They recruit someone, they reach out to you or I, maybe it was 5 years ago, they take a snapshot of what our career history was or our resume at that point in time, and then nothing is helping them to update that or to further enrich that. Or it's not done within the native systems. Like there's a lot of research tools that people go to outside of their internal database that they're working with, or their primary like applicant tracking system or CRM, or most expert networks are using their own proprietary software that's purpose built, but effectively a CRM for their experts in their project management. And then they're spending a lot of time going to other resources, logging into different UIs, and then actually not even copying and pasting sometimes actually physically typing in information from one to the other. And at the end of the day, what all of that means is time. It's an opportunity cost of the time that could have spent working on other projects, but it's also the time that it extends to be able to get the right people over and deliver to those clients. And I think, here we are in 2025, AI has entered the scene. There's a lot of things we can touch on with AI of the different use cases. It's not just a blanket statement of use AI. It's where in the workflow are you using AI? But I think, historically there's been a reliance on sort of login style things when really what you need is the data, and you need the data that's linked together and built into your workflow so that you can use AI and enable that to help speed up those processes. And I spent the past 6 or 7 years now in the data world, primarily focused on financial services use cases. And outside of the major sort of workstation and terminal market, and I used to work at FactSet, which has the workstation and Bloomberg terminal, what a lot of people think about, most clients don't want to be logging in to 25 different systems during the day. They want to have everything in one unified experience. And there's a whole market for companies like the FactSets and Bloombergs of the world that bring in more and more third-party data and integrate that into the workflow. Also, some specific companies that just do that. They take anyone's data from any source and they help kind of create their own version of a visualization platform that they can log into and get all of that information and access. And I think some of these other industries are catching up because they've largely been underserved. I mean, we describe ourselves as a data management and enrichment service purpose built for knowledge networks. I've never actually come across another company that said that they built product for expert network survey panels and recruitment firms. There's some fraud detection tools that are great for survey panels. So it's not like we're the only tool that's built around that. But when it comes to data, it's really important to have the subject matter understanding of the client workflows and knowledge and be able to transform our product so that it can be as best used as possible. Otherwise, most things are generalists and generic, and they're chasing multi-billion-dollar TAMs. And what that tends to end up being is data that's used for sales and marketing purposes. And then a lot of people will try to repurpose that data for sort of these search and recruiting style workflows. It's not an easy task when something is not built for your market, whereas compared to financial services, a lot of stuff is built for financial services. And even then, clients want it to be a more integrated experience and more customized to their specific workflows. So the start where we were starting from was really no solutions that were built for this market. And so we're very excited to be one of those first solutions and fortunate to have some great early partners on this journey who recognize that early on and who we've been able to build alongside and launch a bunch of new products in the past year.
I think the integration piece is crucial, but what I also find really timely and important is that, with AI, AI is as good as the data that you're feeding it, is. So like if you don't have enough data, then yes, you can integrate with whatever AI is out there in the market, but then the output will be questionable and probably even be less accurate than it would have been if the human would process the same case in expert networks. So I find it quite timely, the collision of these two technologies. Well, what you're doing is not the technology per se, but I think that's an important piece to power the AI development in the industry. What other AI applications you think will be adapted by the industry other than help of recruitment, using the data that you guys are providing?
Just to comment on that for a second, when people talk about data as it's used for AI, there's a lot of notions that there's not enough data. Typically in those use cases, they're talking about training models. But if you are putting an AI powered tool on top of your database and it is reading from that database, it's not really a volume of data. Like, we're not saying that the amount of data doesn't exist in the world or in the internet to help with this. You're typically going to be using some kind of AI powered workflow, but that's reading off of the data that you have, whether that's proprietary and first party collected from prior engagements with those experts, or a third party source like us that's helping to sort of augment and further enrich that information. It's very key to have that underlying data. And example I always use is, if you don't know where I work, if you have me, currently working at FactSet, where I left in January of 2023, and I wish it wasn't the case. There are a number of networks that still have me as working at FactSet, because that was that point in time that they had captured my career history and experience. If you get in a project that's related to financial information services, no matter what AI you use, it's actually probably going to pass over my profile because it would think I'm conflicted because it thinks I currently work at the company. And so that's kind of the importance of having like really good data hygiene and automatic updates on even something as basic as someone's career history. This is before we even get into like the deep enrichment use cases. Knowing where someone works is absolutely key. You have to do that at scale across the entirety of the database because you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know who you're missing out on if you never even knew that, the person in your database who you actually have a good relationship with worked there, because that's not going to show up in a regular semantic search. It's not going to show up in an AI powered search. The data is going to become key there. So I just wanted to touch on that really quickly. As far as other use cases, so it's not just the matchmaking or the recruiting, whether that's internal, experts already in the database or going out to the universe and finding net new people. There's a lot of really interesting use cases right now that are being discussed, some being implemented, there's entire companies that are launched, and a lot of venture funding kind of coming into this space around applications for deriving insights from experts using AI. And to give you a couple of examples on that, there's AI-powered voice bots out there that can actually have a conversation like you and I are doing right now, and can ask all these follow-up questions. And while I think a lot of people are still evaluating quality and things like compliance controls around that, it presents a huge opportunity actually to conduct expert-based research at a scale that's unprecedented. So you and I are having this conversation right now. There could be 99 other conversations that are taking place, and you can end up with 100 podcast episodes in the time that it takes you to record one. Scheduling effort that goes into that. So a lot of expert calls are conducted between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. local time. That also happens to be when most people are working in a day job. And so scheduling sometimes becomes a challenge. If I could conduct an expert call at 11 p.m. while sitting on my couch because I'm speaking with something that's not a human who need to schedule on the other side, it opens up a lot of opportunities for scheduling. And those voice AI bots can be used in the vetting process as well. It doesn't just have to be to actually conduct the expert call. So that would be one use case. Another would be sort of post-call. I think the classic summarization use case is still key. It's interesting. People don't talk about summarization as much anymore with AI. I think people think it's not as exciting. I actually think it's just as exciting, just as valuable. It's actually just more mature right now because it was one of the first use cases for a lot of the generative AI tools. But if you conducted 100 expert calls and then you have a library of a bunch historically, and you want to pull out like what are the key trends and inflection points, and just what do I need to know as quickly as possible. Summarization is still going to be a key thing there. There's another use case that I'll be honest, I'm still a little bit of a skeptic on, or I'm not fully convinced. I think there's an opportunity and it's worth exploring, but it is actually AI powered experts. And in the survey world, that's often the term they use is synthetic respondents. It's taking years of history of people's responses to either survey questions or expert calls, and actually creating something that mimics what a live expert, how that person would go about answering different questions. And I say I'm a little bit skeptical because I in that case, I do worry about some of the underlying training data. And I think a lot of the end clients who are making major decisions off of things, I don't know that they're necessarily looking for that. This is a premium market where people pay a high ticket dollar value for access to insights. And maybe in certain markets like B2C research, I think is something that, there's been, unfortunately, it's kind of a race to the bottom on pricing on some of the stuff, and a lot of budgets are constrained. That may change in the future and budgets may go back up, but I don't know that that's exactly what clients are necessarily asking for, and there's a lot of risks. That said, it's an interesting area and something that I'm personally going to be keeping a very close watch on, and testing out different tools out there to see how they can be integrated into the workflow. I'm curious what you're seeing as well. Yeah, you have a background building a lot of technologies for companies in and around this space, and I'm curious what else you've seen.
I see exactly that you mentioned, but also there is another aspect. I love that you touched it. So the voice agents of LLM-powered voice bots and how they could be applied for expert networks. There is another problem for other sides. I came across a post in LinkedIn where a client of expert network joined expert call, and 3 minutes in the call, they realized they're talking to AI. So it's an interesting challenge, because as this technology become more accessible to regular users, why can't I just create a voice agent that will represent me as Alex, and will just hop in on these expert calls, and it will be as good as I am in answering all these questions, and then I just sleep, and this thing earns me money, right? Because experts been paid sometimes quite well for these calls. So that's an interesting challenge from the technology point of view. How do you filter this out? How do you track it? How do you work with it?
There's always fraud that's going to slip through the cracks. I think generally speaking, expert networks do a lot to protect against that. Whereas if someone were to go and reach out to people on their own and just allow anyone to sign up, there's going to be much higher incidence rate of fraud. When I compare fraud in the expert network space versus the B2C survey market, B2C surveys are wild, and there's all sorts of fraudulent problems of these bot farms that are out there just taking surveys and they're spoofing IP addresses, actually some pretty sophisticated efforts out there. But the difference is the survey, you're kind of answering multiple choice questions. An expert call, you actually have to talk to someone. And so there's been this natural barrier to entry to some of the fraudsters. Now technology is catching up that is enabling that. And some of it, though, it goes back to does something actually even make sense? So I think in those examples, people have detected it 3 minutes in, but there might be some things that are just, some answers might be very anomalistic. They might ask a question, you never know at what point you're gonna realize that. And as in just society in general, if I call someone for support on something, if I call CVS pharmacy to get a prescription refilled, at this point I mostly am talking to a computer, and it's not even a conversational voice bot at this point. It's still to speak with the pharmacist, press 1. And it does seem that the world is going that direction in a lot of ways. As a human, I don't know that I'm in that much favor of it. We could say, well, what if an AI powered expert talks to an AI powered interviewer?
What's the
and then an AI powered investment analyst goes and makes a decision on something and trades against an AI powered counterparty in the financial market. Not to go too philosophical or like existential here, but I do wonder like it goes back to sort of what is the role of the human in almost society at that point. And so I don't think we'll be there in the next like 2 to 3 years. Beyond that, I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow, so I can't really forecast very far out. I'm always happy to take a guess, but at the end of the day, I think the people who are really focused on like the client experience, the human experience, the relationship, like asking the best questions, finding the best person who's done something, not just based on expertise, but experience that they've had. I think most decisions are still being made off of that type of research and then the intuition that follows on that. I'd really be interested to hear almost the client perspective, but I could ask any client the same thing. Well, what happens if I don't like the conversations about like replacing humans, and there's a lot of that right now, especially on LinkedIn, especially out of kind of Silicon Valley tech, of saying all these jobs won't exist. And it's the latest one. So it's like 40% of entry-level jobs in professional services won't exist. Well, then I wonder, like, what does that actually mean? No one seems to want to have the discussion of what does that actually mean for society after that. Everyone just seems very bold on stating that human jobs won't be necessary anymore. And so I think for every single thing that we talk about of where you could replace a human, I can kind of add one other one, which is the person who thinks they're making that decision might be the one that gets replaced as well. So it'll be interesting to see. I think the more sophisticated expert networks who have the biggest client base of a real professional decision makers, or that's an investment decision or business decision, I think are thinking cautiously. I think they're cautiously optimistic is how they would describe themselves. They are asking the right questions themselves. They are doing their own expert calls and asking people what they've explored, what they've used, what the pros and cons are, what the challenges were with something. And I think they're looking for ways that they can be more efficient and more effective, but they're not the ones just saying we're just going to AI everything and not have humans work here anymore. There's too much at risk to do that, and too much at risk, not just from their own business standpoint, but like the types of decisions that their clients are making. Their clients are still willing to pay a premium to speak with a human, both at the expert network of who their account manager is, who gets to know them, and then the experts that they're actually engaging on those projects.
I think we'll end up having some sort of balance between AI-powered insights and call it human-led insights. And I think one of the factors that will contribute is data on the experts. So I'll probably, sort of outsource the interview of an expert that is, let's say, like 7 out of 10 on my ranking system. Well, I would love to talk in person with the 10 out of 10 guy.
That already has taken place pre-AI. By the way, there are a number of firms out there, whether it's an end client like a private equity firm goes and hires a management consulting firm to conduct part of their diligence. And 2 weeks of that engagement might be them just absolutely ripping through expert calls and summarizing them. Then there are actually some specialist firms out there that get hired by oftentimes funds to go and sort of supercharge some of that research process. And they're really experts in understanding how to interview people and how to ask those types of questions. But at the end, they're providing some kind of summary that's based on a number of expert calls that take place. Typically, when I've seen those types of client relationships where there's a fund that's engaging with those types of firms, the fund doesn't stop doing expert calls. The individual partner or portfolio manager or analyst doesn't stop doing expert calls. They do exactly what you described. They want to speak with that 10 out of 10 expert. They want to, automate as best they can or outsource the 50 customer calls, but then they want to speak with the former management team or the competitor, or maybe they do want to speak with a customer or two because they know that they need to hear it, and they have an obligation also. They have a fiduciary responsibility to the people whose money they're managing to do their research and diligence properly. And I think everyone is more comfortable when they can hear something directly from someone and be able to ask their own follow-up questions. So that workflow is already taking place, and the expert networks enable that by serving both the the partner on that, the outsourced partner, as well as the sort of primary decision maker on something. And so I agree with you. I think it will be a hybrid approach. I think there's, with any of these AI tools, it's not a blanket statement that everyone has to be using one of them for all of their research. I think you will start to see that even within a specific project, there are certain calls that a human wants to take. There are certain calls where someone is comfortable with an AI voice bot conducting that. There are certain follow-up topics discussions that will take place. I agree with you. I think we'll start to see more of a hybrid. And this is part of what the way some of the expert network opportunity is can they deliver multiple type of delivery mechanisms for those insights to their clients? I think that's been one of the most exciting things about the space, and call it the past 5 years, is most expert networks have diversified away from just doing one-on-one 60-minute calls. There are a number of different more innovative things. There are transcript libraries that are available. You can do quick take surveys with a lot of people, longer surveys. Really, it's any type of question someone's trying to answer. How can they help their clients to get to that answer? And that takes shape in a variety of different methodologies of research. And it's been exciting to see who has stepped forward and introduced new methodologies into the market, and who's been holistic in helping their clients with whatever their client needs. They're going to be able to deliver on that. But there's very few expert networks now that only offer one-on-one 60-minute expert calls. Or if we went back, say, 10 years ago, many were focused just on that, or at least that was 98% of their revenue.
One thought that I had when you were talking about the future and like futuristic kind of vision where AI would take us as a humanity, I was thinking about what we're observing now in technology world, and how the entry junior level positions are vanishing. Like there's no need for them. And then we're facing, problems. Okay, if there is no opportunity for the junior developers, junior engineers to learn, how would they become senior? But so where we're getting with this is, as you said, when you run the interviews, some analysts may know how to do it well and ask good questions. Some may not. So it's interviewing skill. And I think there is another use case that we haven't touched here. How AI may help is help analysts to learn, improve their interviewing skills. And there are different ways to think of it. So like the most autonomous way is like, okay, AI, do the interview. I will see what questions you ask. I study it, and next one I do myself. Another one could be, okay, I'm running the interview and then AI is listening, and depending on the context of the project, depending on what kind of data it has, other interviews, a library, or again, coming back to the importance of data, it may prompt interesting questions that may highlight certain aspects of this conversation and project in general. And then, there are numerous other ways that this could address this problem. I've heard it several times throughout my conversations with people in the industry that the interviewing skill is something that, you have to acquire with practice, and not all analysts have it developed to the extent that they can actually interview efficiently expert that has so many, points to share and insights, but he didn't because he just haven't asked.
Yeah. It's very much the reality. And having been on the other side of the table as an expert who's done a bunch of expert calls over my career, I see that firsthand. And there are calls that I get off, and the client might be evaluating me and my quality as an expert. In the back of my head, I'm thinking about the quality of the questions that person is asking, and what kind of insights that they're getting off of that. And there are times where at the end of the call, someone will say, like, one of my favorite questions is, what didn't I ask that I should have asked? And sometimes I say, well, you really asked, I'm thinking you asked almost everything. Like, this was a great call. And sometimes that takes place over multiple follow-up calls. But there are other times where I'm like, they didn't even scratch the surface. There's so many other dynamics here. And it's really challenging with 1 minute left on a call So just give them like the list of all of the things that they didn't ask. And so I see that a lot. And I think there are some trainings out there for humans. So particularly the hedge fund market, a lot of people go through, there's some providers of trainings about how to interview people, both for expert calls as well as management meetings and corporate access. Like they really help people understand how to ask questions. And there's absolutely like an art and a science to doing that. And if I look at like a management consulting firm, typically when someone joins as an associate or like right out of school, they're usually going to be paired with someone who has been doing it for a while so they can learn from that person. So to your point though about AI, I think that does allow for some of that training. Some of that could be in the form of like a real-time co-pilot that's sitting with you on a call, prompting you to ask the next question. The other could be after the fact of how to continually improve. And I think it's a pretty cool use case. So when you do something and you do something over time, to be able to ask AI to critique you and help you do it better in the future. Like there's this part of the market that unfortunately doesn't really get talked about as much, but like you can prompt a variety of different AI tools and say, here's all my historical stuff. How should I be thinking about doing this better in the future? And I've likened it a lot recently, particularly the investment world, to professional sports teams and professional athletes. And professional athletes and teams will watch tape afterwards. They watch tape after, they watch tape before. They are constantly in this flywheel of just continuous improvement. And I do think that I agree with you. I think AI introduces another ability to continuously improve and continuously improve in what's more private than asking your boss for feedback on something. Some people don't want to ask. Some bosses won't have anything. Some bosses may just critique you on something just because they feel they have to, even though it may not have been actually the best constructive piece of feedback to improve in the future. And so I think that we'll probably start to see more of that. And particularly with the decision intelligence as well, you can factor in the decision that you made and what the outcome was and be asking the question of if I were to go do it all over again, or when I'm about to step back up to the plate, how do I do it better than I did it last time? And AI is going to significantly enable that, both in terms of the questions that people are asking as part of their diligence, but also I think the decision intelligence that comes after the fact, once the decision is made, looking back on that decision and figuring out before the next time, is there something that we should do differently? Is there something that we should, and it doesn't all have to be negative. It doesn't have to be, don't ask this question. It may be, no, that was a great question. Make sure you continue to ask that or move that up in the process, because what ended up happening discussion wise after that question was asked, the value of that call increased exponentially. But you asked the question, at the 51st minute and you had to jump after 60 minutes, move that up. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things that will, to your point, kind of help with what questions should be asked, whether that's something just prompting someone who maybe doesn't know something about a certain subject matter, or for someone who does, being like that true co-pilot to help them really maximize their decision intelligence capabilities and reflect on that so that they can continuously improve.
Yeah, it's almost like a use case for that AI-powered expert, right? So you jump on the call. It's a fictitious discussion. It's not being recorded, but it's kind of your coach, how to become a better interviewer on this call.
Yeah. And look, I mean, you've been doing this podcast for some time now. You've had a lot of guests, a couple good friends of mine have been on, and I'm sure you realize it too. It's sort of subconscious that you're continuously improving the way that you ask questions and the way that you conduct these interviews over time. But now AI might even help you make that even better. So whenever one of those technologies is there, that or whatever you use and pick, I think it'd be pretty cool if you loaded up all your prior podcast episodes, and we could come back and do another episode where we reflect on that, and then I'll be reflecting on my answers and my rambling as well.
Well, I'll think about that. Then let's wrap it up. And I'd like to talk about concept of expert networks. And if we were to partner today and build a brand new expert network, what core principles would you preserve from the traditional model, and what would you throw out entirely?
So I know what I would definitely preserve goes back to when I started in this industry, which is just the value of the human relationship, whether that's the end client relationship or the expert relationship. I think that's really key. And it's a two-sided marketplace in a lot of ways. And the supply side of the industry over the past 10 years has increasingly been neglected. We talk about the ratio of outreach. I'm not talking about any specific network I've worked at, more just an industry reflection, which I think a lot of the networks would agree on, which is that everyone prioritized speed over I don't want to say over quality, but over the experience. Mm-hmm. And so what that has resulted in is reaching out to the ratio I heard more recently and kind of confirmed is about 30-1 experts for every successful consult. And what that's doing is if you need 10 people and you reach out to 300, you may not, at the end of the day, you get your 10 people over to the client. It's easy to say that was a success. But if there were 50 experts who responded to that questionnaire and took 10 minutes out of their day to answer those questions, thinking they were going to get paid for their time, and then the client only wants to speak with 10 of them, now you have 40 people who just took time out of their day and now actually have a negative experience associated with that. And so it's selfish plug here for my business, but this is the type of stuff that we're enabling people to improve on, is that ratio of outreach that's actually needed to get to the correct experts, so that we can reverse that trend of more and more experts dropping out of expert networks. And that has been happening at an increasing clip. And I think there's enough smart people at these networks who are starting to think about that, starting to realize that. But if we could have almost skipped that happening, we would be in a much better spot right now. And I think there'd be more people willing to sign up and share their expertise. I see it probably at this point, surveyed or interviewed about 1,000 experts in the past year and a half. And that was probably the most common theme, was that the experience hasn't been great for the experts themselves. And so I think if everyone can return a little bit back to kind of the human element, if someone wants to be called on the phone, call them on the phone. If they prefer text message them. If they prefer email, filling in a lot of those answers already. So I get asked all the time what my roles and responsibilities were at prior companies. Once I've answered that question once with someone, I sort of expect that, I hope that they would retain that information, so that the next time they call me, they can skip that question, or they could just confirm. Maybe they read it back to me just to confirm nothing has changed, and then they move on to the next question. And this happens in the survey space as well. Screening and survey fatigue is a real thing. And I would definitely want to see people, either from the data that they've already collected or from third-party data, integrate more of that directly to improve some of those outcomes.
Dan, I enjoyed the conversation a lot. Thank you very much for being part of it and sharing all the insights on the expert network world.
Thanks, Alex. Really appreciate you having me on. And
so thanks for listening to Lance. For the listeners, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and leave the feedback in our podcast platforms where we're publishing this. And see you next time. Bye-bye.